Now, with the failure of the Better Care Reconciliation Act, that is, of course, the Republican plan to repeal and replace Obamacare, the establishment and Republicans are now on the attack, especially with the newfound popularity of single payer. So now they are on the attack against single payer. So again, you have both the establishment Democrats and Republicans going after single payer, Medicare for All. Now, in the Washington Post, Dave Weigel wrote about these attacks and showed how desperate the Republicans specifically are getting in the face of their own repeated failures to pass repeal and replace. Now, he writes, Democrats who are largely using the week-long recess to rally opposition to the Republicans' deeply unpopular attempt to repeal parts of the Affordable Care Act are now facing a political challenge of their own, increasing pressure from their liberal base to embrace universal government-funded health care coverage. Senator Bernie Sanders, perhaps the country's most prominent proponent of universal coverage, is waiting for an opening, likely after the GOP's repeal push succeeds or fails, to introduce a new bill. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Kirsten Gillibrand, both seen as potential 2020 candidates, each said last week that the party needed to get behind Medicare for All. So, look, we're seeing some of the Democrats come on board, Elizabeth Warren naturally, to single payer. Well, that's wonderful. Now, remember, though, that before you cheer, this is the same party that nationally ran a candidate that said single payer would never, ever happen. Oh, it's too expensive. It raises too much taxes. Basically, what they use is that they use Republican talking points against this. And we could see that, of course, with California's Medicare for All bill, that Democrats, in a supermajority, by the way, in California, failed to pass. And Governor Jerry Brown, he wasn't going to pass it. And of course, House Speaker Anthony Rendon famously said, oh, man, this bill's so incomplete. We don't know how to pay for it. There are ways to pay for it, and we know it. And of course, they use Republican right-wing talking points of, we can't figure out how to, we're going to have to raise taxes. We can't do that. It's going to be really expensive. So again, they're using those talking points. Now, if you're going to use Republican talking points, well, then here comes the Republicans to reinforce that. Facing a widespread voter backlash over the House and Senate repeal bills, they're trying to make universal coverage a political anchor for the Democrats by asking whether they can seriously defend trillions of dollars in new taxes and spending. Oh my God, taxes and spending. Oh my God, government health care. Hey, you realize that a majority of Americans now actually support government-sponsored health care. In a recent poll, 60% of Americans said the government should be responsible for ensuring health care coverage for every American. That's a recent Pew Research Center survey. Huh, interesting. Now, that includes nearly a third of Republicans. Yes, and nearly a third of Republicans are like, government health care. Government should ensure that every American has health care. Now, the same day, the National Republican Congressional Committee had highlighted a recent interview with Randy Bryce. Now, Randy Bryce is, of course, planning to take on Paul Ryan in Wisconsin, and he's a huge supporter of Medicare for All. The guy was a Bernie Sanders delegate. So, of course, he's in favor of Bernie Sanders-style, health care. Now, he was questioned by CNN anchors about the additional $32 trillion in taxes. Now, wait a minute here. So, that framing, right? Healthcare, Medicare for All is going to cost an additional $32 trillion. Oh, my God. That's on top of what we're already spending. Wrong. That's actually bullshit. It's not an additional $32 trillion. That's actually the total cost over the next 10 years for Medicare for All. Now, that's their framing. Let me give you some actual facts. Now, right now, we spend in America, I kind of want to give you a second to guess how much we spend in America right now on our health care. Now, this is, of course, Obamacare. We spend $34 trillion on our current health system. Now, this current healthcare system doesn't cover everybody. We know that. And the people that are covered by private insurance, well, sometimes they can't even use it because they have high deductibles and they have copays. So, not only that, but our healthcare costs, this is what we pay currently, $34 trillion. However, over the next 10 years, that is slated to rise 5.6%. Now, that's according to fellow Washington Post writer Paul Waldman, who actually looked at the data. Now, that means between 2018 and 2027, the United States of America will spend $49 trillion on healthcare costs. So it goes from 34 trillion, sorry, for the last 10 years to 49 trillion in the next 10 years. That's our current system. That's insanity. Again, we spend 34 trillion. Medicare for All for the next 10 years will cost $32 trillion. Now, obviously, that means replacing the old system. So you would get rid of all the subsidies for Obamacare. You would get rid of all that different stuff related to the ACA. And you would just expand Medicare for everybody. And that's it. That's what you're supposed to do. Now, that would free up the money that we currently spend on our healthcare system to be spent on single payer. You know what that means? We would actually save $2 trillion. And of course, when you have the cost controls inside of a universal single-payer healthcare system, well, we would make sure that the prices would not rise, that we would not end up paying $49 trillion in 2027. Because, again, healthcare prices rise because we don't have proper price controls inside of the ACA. Single-payer would have price controls. It saves money. It actually saves a lot of money, single payer does. Now, of course, your taxes will go up a little bit in a progressive way, of course, meaning, of course, rich people will pay more, obviously. But at the same time, you won't have to pay copays, deductibles. You won't have to pay or deal with an insurance company at all, and you're guaranteed coverage. Now, Republicans would want you to believe that any cost of single payer would be on top of what you're already paying. And that is, of course, 100% false, but they're going to spread that narrative. And that's how they're framing this entire healthcare argument. Even Spicer, Sean Spicer, White House press secretary, and man among the bushes, chimed in on this. He said, when you look at the majority of House Democrats, they support a single payer $32 trillion bill backed by Bernie Sanders. Oh my God. That 32 trillion. Again, they're throwing out numbers that are scary. Right? Oh, scary numbers, scary numbers. We actually spend more on that in our healthcare right now, as I just pointed out. But it's scary, scary. Now, what he's referring to, and where that $32 trillion comes from, is the John Conyers bill. Now, that bill is currently backed by 113 co-sponsors. So, yeah, there's actually a lot of people in the House that are supporting this Medicare for All bill. And all credit to those Democrats. Now, what about the Democratic leadership in the House? Nancy Pelosi. Well, we already know where she stands. She actually doesn't believe in single payer and says, oh, you know, the American people, they are just not ready for single payer system. Have you seen the polls? That's obviously not true. No, you know who's not ready for single payer? Your donors. Those are the people who are not ready. Now, Spicer continues. He says, we need to accept that Obamacare is dead, which it's not. It's actually not dead, and it's not in a death spiral, even though you're still trying to sabotage it. Now, he says, we need to understand that the reality is that what the choice is between putting in a system that is affordable and accessible, which is definitely not what the Better Care Reconciliation Act is. If you looked at it at all, it actually raises premiums, and it cuts Medicaid and gives giant tax cuts for the rich. In fact, some of the richest households in the world, the 400 richest households in the United States, I mean, will have an average tax cut of $7 million a year. So, and it raises, of course, premiums, especially for people who are older and sicker. So, no, it actually doesn't do any things. It doesn't make it more affordable or accessible. Now, he says, you can choose that or a single-payer $32 trillion health care plan that the majority of House Democrats support. Again, it doesn't get into the fact that, well, it actually will save money. It's actually cheaper than what than we're doing right now. It's actually more efficient. No, they don't. They leave that out. Now, he also leaves out that a majority of the American public actually supports this system now. Hence the scare campaign from the Republicans and their allies within the corporate Democrats. This is why they're fear-mongering about the cost. Now, a lot of studies point out, though, that, again, there will be a great deal of savings overall, both in government spending and in individuals, and yes, even companies. Of course, since they won't have to worry about covering their health and covering the health insurance of their employees anymore. But the establishment, of course, who has been long bought off by the health insurance industry, and Republicans who despise the idea of paying a little bit more in taxes to make sure that everybody has access to health care and not die, well, they're fighting against it by trying to muddy the facts and scare you away from supporting a system that actually works, and it works well in nearly every other industrialized country. So don't buy it, because they've got the fear, but you've got the facts. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.